Buffalo Sports Podcast, where we talk history of the game, numbers and stats. And each week we highlight a charity that's doing good. If you haven't subscribed yet, then you should, because I'm sick to this the real deal. And you know I gotta shout out the Buffalo Bills. Turn it up to the max, sit back and relax. This the Buffalo Sports Podcast. Let's go!
Hey, what is up, Bills Mafia? Welcome into this episode of the Buffalo Nerd, your home for Buffalo Bills football with a charity on top. Brought to you by SB Nation on the Buffalo Rumblings podcast network and being served up live by Picasso's Pizza on the Buffalo Rumblings vidcast network. Treat yourself to the most flavorful pizza on game day. Picasso's, we are Buffalo Pizza. Shipping locally and nationwide. Order online at picassospizza.net. I'm your host, Colt Schroeder. If this is your first time catching the show, thanks for being here. If you're already part of the Nerd Mafia, welcome home. You can see I'm joined this week by my man, Ryan Thomas. He's going to hang out with me a few times this month as we are going to talk camp. We're going to break down the roster. We're going to have a lot of fun just chatting Bills football. How are you, sir?
I am doing fantastic, Colt. It's a pleasure being back on the Buffalo Nerd Sports Podcast. I am pumped up, due in large part to the fact that not only did you invite me, but man, that intro, that's a fire intro, as the kids say these days, and I am ready, raring, revved to go.
Absolutely. Well, we got to be hopped up and we got to be raring to go, because obviously we're going to be firing on Thursday nights right before kickoffs, and we're going to catch a little bit of the game each and every week on the show as we do it moving forward with the season as it progresses. Obviously tonight there's football. It's kicking off. The NFL is here. The Shield is back. The Buffalo Bills are in full swing. Right. So we're going to start breaking down the roster tonight. We're going to hit the QBs. We're going to talk O-line, and then we're going to hit the special teams. But before we do that, each and every week we do like to shout out a charity or, a cool organization, somebody that's doing good in their neighborhood. So this week I'm going to shout out Primetime585.org. Very cool organization. They're doing a lot of work with just getting the youth, kind of in situations that they're not used to being in, and understanding that it's okay to be there. So they connect them with, they do a lot of events with police officers and all these other things where they just get them around, people that you're normally kind of a little uncomfortable with. The police aren't everybody's friend all the time, right? So they do a lot of cool events to get young youth athletes in better positions to build their self-esteem, do all that kind of stuff. So a very cool organization. You guys can check them out over at primetime585.org. So we got some of the usual characters in the house. Daniel's here. I see Richard's here. Yep, and Jason's breaking the news. There is a rain delay on the season, right? Oh, boy, oh, boy. Ryan, how you feeling about the season kicking off?
I'm feeling great. The Hall of Fame game is special. Canton, Ohio is a very special place. Pro Football Hall of Fame is obviously hallowed ground due to those busts that apparently they do talk to each other. That's what they say. Right. The busts talk to one another. That'd be pretty cool if you walk through those halls. I've been there a few times, and you see legend upon legend upon legend that paved the way for the juggernaut that is the NFL as it stands right now. They are so far and above each and every, I should say, professional league. The NFL is king, as I like to say. So it's good to get it started. It's the Jaguars. It's the Raiders. We're not expecting many starters tonight, but it's football. We'll be watching.
Absolutely. I mean, I saw a thing earlier, like, how many snaps do you think there'll be between Derek carr and Trevor Lawrence tonight? And I was like 9, maybe, right? Like one of them might get 6 plays. One might get 3, something like that. But either way, the football season is in full swing now with the official kickoff of this game, right? So let's talk camp. I mean, camp's been all over the place. We've seen some ups and downs so far. Some guys are out already. But the Miami Dolphins just got smacked for their stupidity. Let's touch on that briefly, right? Because those morons, they've been talking smack all offseason about how they're going to destroy us and we're not going to win and they're going to win the division and we're going to be 3rd in the division, this, that, and the other. They get smacked on the wrist. How do you feel about it?
Well, I understand what it's like to be a fan of a team that, you convince yourself that the expectations should be higher than reality. What is the expectation? What is the reality? The expectation to Dolphins fans, it seems like they believe that this team is going to be a perennial Super Bowl contender. And I take my Bills hat off and just look at this X's and O's wise, football wise, take my Bills fandom out of it. One wide receiver trade does not make you a Super Bowl contender. It's all about the quarterback. It's a quarterback-driven league. We know as Bills fans, right? The Buffalo Bills, a few years back, they went out, they got Sammy Watkins, they traded up for him, thinking that would somehow make E.J. Manuel better. And yet, it seemed like Sammy Watkins barely played with E.J. Manuel there soon after. So,
E.J. Manuel barely played.
Right. So Tyreek Hill is one of those guys that he's a polarizing player. I think what Miami gave up for him was a king's ransom for a wide receiver that his game is predicated on his speed, and he's only getting older. He's on the wrong side of his career, the wrong side of 30, as I like to say, rather than the right side of 30. And you got Tua, who is a huge question mark, and all of these, sports podcasters around the nation, as we are, Buffalo Bills sports podcasters, you see the Dolphins, the Finsiders, all the other shows that they have that cover the team, and these guys believe that the Dolphins are going to finish first in the division, win the AFC East, and that the Buffalo Bills will finish third. I think a sucker's born every day, and apparently there's a lot of suckers that are Miami Dolphins fans, unfortunately. The fact that they believe with Tua that they will go to the playoffs and be a Super Bowl contender, as well as with first-year head coach Mike McDaniel, who I think he's a good offensive mind, but it never goes that way. You never have a new head coach in his first season come in and wreck shop. It never happens. It hasn't happened for Belichick. It didn't happen for Parcells. Usually the first year that a new head coach is on the team, there's some growing pains, and I think there's going to be some growing pains for Miami, to say the least.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, to me, and this Tua and Hill thing, Hill is not going to get along with him for very long, and that's just what's going to happen, right? There's going to be so many times that Hill's going to be open and Tua can't do it, and Hill is just not going to have it, right? It's how it's going to break down. But more important, now let's take it back, because we kind of hit on this already a little bit, but there's been some injuries already. So I touch every week on the Poyer situation, hashtag Poyer watch, because we got to get this figured out, right? Is he going to have a deal? Is he not going to have a deal? And now he's hurt, right? So for me, I'm this is a little twofold. I think it's probably good for him in some regard that he's not going to be exposed any further for the next few weeks to get him to the season, right? On the flip side of that, does this hurt his ability to get paid right now?
I would say so, and I think his ability to get paid was already a little bit, dare I say, challenging. And I talked about that in the last time I was on your show, and we talked about that on my podcast too, just in terms of the fact that he just had a new deal recently. You have his counterpart, his Batman to his Robin, in my opinion, Mike Hyde, who decided to ultimately shift some of his money around so that the Buffalo Bills could go out and sign a guy like Von Miller. Those are the storylines that kind of get buried when the Bills bring in a player like that, is, well, how did it happen? And players like Micah Hyde took the pay cut so that the Buffalo Bills could go out and get a Von Miller. But I think Jordan Poyer knows just as well as anyone that the best chance for him to succeed, as an individual player as well as compete potentially for a Super Bowl, is in Buffalo. And that contract talk somewhat died down. I didn't really hear as much of it once training camp began, and know that he has a quote-unquote hyperextended elbow that'll put him out for the next few weeks, at least from training camp, and they might actually hold him out from training camp, being that he's just such an important member of the team. I would, to be honest with you, Colt, if I were calling the shots, which I'm not, but I would put Poyer on ice until the season starts. He's too vital a player to re-injure something or potentially injure something else heading into the season. And you asked me a really awesome question last night when I was on my podcast in terms of the depth behind Poyer and Hyde, and is that a concern? It's a massive concern for me, and so much so that when I put a mock draft together, this past March prior to the 2022 NFL Draft, I would hope that they would take a corner in the first round and potentially a safety in the second round. I'm not hating on the James Cook pick at all. 28 looks really good in training camp as well. But I definitely think that if Poyer and Hyde become banged up throughout the season, that could pose a problem for this Bills team based on who's playing behind them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I that's why I brought it up right last night on your spot, was because that to me that's is interesting, right? It's gonna really change a lot of things if they happen to go down. There's not a lot of chatter about Hyde. He's just not back yet. I can't imagine they're going to expose him very much as well, right? They're going to keep him under wraps a little bit too. You don't put your duo at risk. It's not like either of these guys came back not in shape or any of those things, right? Like they're ready to go, so you don't have to worry about them in that regard, right? So, but we're going to hit on 3 position groups this week, and each week I'm going to hit and break it down, and we'll eventually touch every position group as we get into September before the season kicks off. So this week we're going to start out with QB. I think obviously there's not much chatter about the competition for QB1. I think we've chosen, who will be QB1, right? But last year we had Mitch Trubisky, right? Yeah, the man behind you, right? So last year we had Trubisky, right? And to me, I felt more comfortable that if Josh happened to go down, that we wouldn't have to change the offense that much, because Mitch couldn't make all the throws, right? But he's got the ability to kind of run. He could do a lot of the stuff. So now we don't have that anymore. We have kind of 2 guys now that are older and they're not really going to be mobile, right? So who do you think it's going to be for one? Who's your number 2? And, how do you feel about that?
I think that the quarterback room they have now is one that their roles. I think the players know their roles heading in and what the expectation is for them in terms of how those players will prepare behind Allen. I love the fact that they brought back Matt Barkley. I think Matt Barkley is a guy to have in that locker room, and obviously he's somebody that Josh Allen really respects, and the respect is very mutual. Following both on social media, as these guys have, they work the hardest job, I think, in terms of preparing their body for the season. When they do have the quote-unquote off season in football, these guys are enjoying their time together. Josh Allen, his girlfriend, and Matt Barkley's wife, they're always hanging out. They're always going on wine tours and stuff like that. And that's the stuff that I actually like to see in terms of a close-knit team. Players that actually hang out outside of the game. Goes to show you how close that relationship is between the 2 of them, dating back to Allen's rookie season. Mm-hmm. But Matt Barkley, to me, is the number 3, and Case Keenum is easily the number 2, and I was actually very happy that they were able to bring in Case Keenum, due in large part to the gift that was Mitch Trubisky, signing him on a 1-year deal, and knowing the expectation that Mitch Trubisky would find his way as a quarterback 1 in free agency. Whether he went to Pittsburgh, he could have went to a lot of different teams, to be honest with you. But he found himself in Pittsburgh, and Case Keenum's a quarterback that I crunched some numbers on Keenum throughout his career, and the career of Case Keenum is actually pretty unprecedented. An undrafted free agent, signed by the Texans, played and started at one point for every single team that he's played for. He started a stretch of games, much like a former beloved quarterback of the Buffalo Bills, Ryan Fitzpatrick. Obviously, Keenum hasn't played in the NFL nearly as long as Fitzpatrick eventually did play in the NFL for, but who's to say he can't? I mean, who's to say he's not going to be Josh Allen's backup the next, 3, 4, 5 years? That's a really good scenario, best case scenario, I think, for their team. 2017, he threw for 3,547 pass yards. He had 22 TDs and 7 picks. He was responsible for the pass that was the Minneapolis Miracle to Stephon Diggs.
To Diggs, yep.
So if Josh Allen, God forbid, heaven forbid, I don't even want to say finish the sentence, but you know what I'm about to say. If something happened, Case Keenum comes in as the starter, and I think you have a really cool advantage in the sense that the quarterback that you would have as a backup has played meaningful snaps with your best offensive playmaker. That's huge. That's a feather in the cap of this offense. Ken Dorsey, I think, would be very thankful for that. As well, last season, as recent as last season with Case Keenum as Baker Mayfield's backup, he went 2-0, and he played very well in 2 games for the Cleveland Browns. So if you have like this little window where Josh Allen is out for a week or 2, I feel more than confident about Case Keenum coming in and holding down the fort for the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm in the same place as you are as far as who should be the two. I think for me with Keenum, I do like the football IQ piece of him, right? I think that he would be able to make the plays. He'd be able to make the decisions. Obviously, some things would have to change, right? We wouldn't be running with a QB or any of those things anymore, right? But I do like that he has played in games that were where he's had success. You know, that team went to the playoffs, and it was in large part because of him a few years back. So I think he can do it, but it's mostly going to depend on the offensive line for me, right? You're going to have an offensive line that's completely different at that point in time to be able to protect a guy that can't move around compared to a guy that can absolutely go wherever he wants to, right? So I think we're going to have that kind of piece of the action, but I agree with you 100%. There's not very much conversation here. I think that especially now that you can stash a veteran player on the practice squad, I mean, they can keep Barkley over there and just keep him around if, something happens, because I don't anticipate we're running 3 out every week. We've never really have. I don't see that we will again, this season. But speaking of that protecting, this offensive line group it's interesting. I think we made some really nice changes this offseason, starting with the new offensive line coach. I always have been a fan of Cromer. I think that he does a very nice job. He's done it everywhere as he's been, but this offensive line to me has more of a little bit of a run edge feel to them, or that's what I think we were going for. Where do you stand with the offensive line?
I think that they have some legitimate continuity that they've desperately needed over the last, I'd say, previous 5 to 10 years. The drought years, you saw the offensive line change on a weekly basis. I think at one point, one season with Eric Wood on the team as their center, he played guard, he played center, then he went to right guard, then he moved back to center. It was just a hodgepodge group, where this group legitimately, you can say Deion Dawkins left tackle. You can say Roger Saffold. Outside of Von Miller, I think Roger Saffold is the best free agent addition that they added to this roster. God willing, he stays healthy. I know he had a car accident, and I hope he recovers from that soon, because he's such a crucial piece to what I think Ken Dorsey and what Sean McDermott wants to accomplish with this offense, and having more of a run dimension style to this offense. And you go back to previous offensive lines that they had, Richie Incognito is the last guard that the Buffalo Bills have had that could pull and create running lanes for the running backs. And LaShawn McCoy talked about it on plenty of podcasts and talked about it to the media while he was with the Buffalo Bills, how crucial it was to have a left guard as athletic as Richie Incognito. Roger Saffold, these last 4 or 5 years, you can go to Pro Football Focus, you can go to any analytics site that you want, just look at the tape. Roger Saffold is a mammoth of a human being. He is a big man, and he can throw around a body any weight. He can line up against anybody. He's a heavyweight guard, to say the least, and I'm excited for him. Mitch Morse, who has been their center for these last few seasons, I think he's rock steady. I think Roger Saffold will actually make Mitch Morse better, to where they've had to somewhat over-rely on Mitch Morse due to not having the guards that they should have. As well, we didn't add possibly one starter formerly from the Titans, but potentially two, with a name that I don't want to botch. I believe it's Eisenberry.
Yeah, I think that's how he says it.
I think I'm saying that right. So they could have two big guards, two mammoth at the position, and then at right tackle, I think Spencer Brown is the guy. I think he earned the right to be the guy. I know Ryan Bates played guard pretty well for Buffalo last season. He's somebody that can swing whether it's left or right if there is an injury, or if, just for reps, just to get rest to a big guy like Roger Saffold or a big guy like Eisenberry. And I think to look at that and break that down, who is the odd man out of those names that I just mentioned? And to me, it's Cody Ford. A former second-round draft choice that just hasn't panned out. He might be one of the very few, if only one, miss draft-wise by Brandon Beane since he became the general manager of the Buffalo Bills. I can't believe I'm saying that, because everything Brandon Beane has done is he's got like the Midas touch. It turns to gold every single time. But I just don't see where Cody Ford fits. I don't know if he fits as a tackle. I don't know if he fits as a guard. doesn't fit as a tackle. He has to fit as a guard, and I don't know if he's better than the guys that I just mentioned.
Yeah, I mean this group, the specifically the two gentlemen that were brought in from the Titans, I think that was for a reason, right? I mean, absolutely, they were one of the best running games in the league for multiple seasons, right? And they come with an edge that's different than what we typically have been doing, right? We were kind of that pass happy kind of offensive line. It almost felt like, and it was built that way instead of that group that could kind of, think that it could really stick you in the ground instead of the other way of just holding up the fight, right? But actually move you and then hold up the fight because we can, right? Like you can do both. But yeah, I mean, let's see. Jason Taylor's got a little something here. What does he have to say? Sounds like Ryan doesn't think Bates will be the starting right guard. Yeah, it's good. I think it will probably be Bates, but I think it's going to be very interesting. The level of competition for this offensive line is definitely different this season, especially if they do decide to take a different approach in how they want to run. Right. There's a couple of these guys fit the run way better than the others. Like Bates, if you go look at PFF, he gave up like no pressures in the 250 some odd 7 snaps he was in. Right. So he looks good and he could do that, but he's a little thinner in some of these guys. Right. So it just depends on what you're trying to do. I do think that Bates could stick, and he's absolutely going to be around because he's going to fill that role. Like if Brown is not 100% or Brown goes down, Bates is there. But we do have this nice, beautiful option now to move around some very good offensive linemen, I think. And Cody Ford, I for some reason he's going to make it. Like I'm not, because realistically, if you think about this, like think about how many times that Bobby Hart has made this team back, so I feel like Cody Ford at this point, like even he's a veteran, but so they could even just try to stash him on a practice squad at this point, right? And continue to work with him and see if somebody else takes him. But I've heard some good reports from him so far out of camp that he's doing all right. But yeah, this group is completely different. It's going to take more to be on this team at the offensive line than it has in the past, for sure.
Exactly, and that's what I would say in regards to Ryan Bates. I like Ryan Bates. I was one of the few guys, it seemed like, it felt like I was banging the Ryan Bates drum to get him some starting reps over the course of last season, and he really did help change the dynamic of the offensive line. But Brandon Beane's looking at bringing in competition across the board. No player is safe. No matter what you did last year, there's no player that is safe. And I think that's just a mentality that every GM and every should have year in, year out to make the team just a little bit more competitive going from training camp to preseason to the regular season. And as you mentioned, Ryan Bates can be somebody that he might be a better pass blocking guard or a run blocking guard, or vice versa, to where it's situational. And the fact that they do have that flexibility, and I kind of alluded to it in terms of the past, they did not have that flexibility on the offensive line. They had very one-dimensional offensive linemen that just were not long-term solutions.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it. Wood had a bounce everywhere. Now they just plug somebody else in. Or they move somebody else, but you're not moving your center around and having to do all this like shuffling all the time. You've got pieces that you can rotate in, you feel comfortable with. And I think, but realistically, both of us, I think, we're on board with Jessica that I have faith in whatever we're going to put out there, right? Like I do think that this is going to be a very productive offensive line this season. I do really have that feeling. I think just with the speed that we're probably going to potentially play with, I think that this is a little bit different of an edge. And we also have to a little bit worry about Deion Dawkins' health, right? So some of these guys are going to stick around that are a little more diverse and be able to kick outside and do those things just because there's some things going on there that we're going to have to monitor throughout the season, right? So this offensive line is going to be a huge piece of this team, and how they get through camp is going to be very interesting when we get ready for September. But it's a hot group for sure.
For sure.
All right, let's close out with the special teams because there's not much really happening here. You've got the long snapper, Reed. He still holds down the fort for another season. They've not brought in any competition yet again to challenge Mr. Ferguson for his role on the roster. So the long snapper is safe, and that's taken over. Okay. Our kicker, I'm not worried about him. Where are you with Bass? I'm comfortable with him.
Tyler Bass is one of the best kickers in the National Football League, and that might be like a hot take to some, but there was one game where Tyler Bass had a rough day at the office, and it was against the Jets, And ever since, you want to just go from that game moving forward, look up the statistics, look up the attempts per, made field goals per attempt, the distance. One of the best kickers in the National Football League. He is automatic. So I have no doubt in my mind that Tyler Bass is at some point going to cinch himself a very large and long-term payday from the Buffalo Bills to be able to kick in the elements the way that he can and to be as consistent and as reliable as he's been since he was drafted. Tyler Bass is safe. Really, the question is the punter position.
Right.
What's going to
I
happen
agree with you
that?
100%. Bass, when you draft him, because you don't typically draft those positions, right? So when you draft him, the idea is that hopefully this is your guy. This is your kicker the next 10 years, right? Like he's going to get here. He's going to love it here. He's going to stay here. You're going to always keep him around, right? And having that stability in a position like that, especially in the elements, no matter what would they do with the stadium moving forward or this, that, and the other, you still want a guy with a big leg that can kick no matter what, because there's still going to be outdoor stadiums where we travel, other places, right? Like there's still going to be that stuff around. So I have complete faith in him as well. But it all does boil down to the only real battle that's taking place, and that's the punting competition, between another gentleman that was drafted, right? So we saw this last time when we drafted a guy. It was, okay, fingers crossed, this is going to be the guy that we're going to keep. The hack man apparently is putting up a fight, and his holding, that might still give him the edge. I don't know. I'm very curious because I don't feel like you could put the punt god on the practice roster and somebody's not going to take him.
I agree.
Right?
I agree 100%.
So I feel like it's such a risky maneuver, but if you need that holding capability, because that's where the points are at, right? Like, I mean, that's where the points are at. Like if the punter, yeah, okay, but where are you on this battle? Like, what do you think's going to happen here?
It's really tough because this is a position, if you look at the last 4 or 5 years, this is a position that the Buffalo Bills have had a very tough time filling. I mean, going back to Corey Boriquez and some of the other punters that they've had, the punter position is one that they just can't seem to get right. And Matt Araiza was one of those punters in this draft that was listed as the top of his position draft wide. So for the Buffalo Bills to get him and to seek him out and to draft him, and as you mentioned with Tyler Bass, to use a draft choice on a specialist, whether it's a punter or a kicker, you're hoping that guy can be your guy. The thing with Matt Hack that I have a tough time with is his inability to punt in the wind. That's something that we need a punter. If you can't punt in the wind in November, December in Buffalo, you're in trouble. And more about how he attacked the football before punting it. His lead steps into the football, I think that's why I was just punting these footballs left and right in the game against New England, I believe. There was one against the Jets, too, that he was just off. And prior to coming to Buffalo, he was in Miami. It means half the games he was playing in were in tropical weather for the most part. It's a completely different atmosphere here, as we know, and the punt god is a punter that punted well everywhere he punted. His footballs that were from his leg were cutting through whatever the weather elements provided. So I think the punter position should come down to who punts the ball best, and that's it. I know the holder position is extremely important, and Matt Hack is very good at that, but we need that next dimension. If we could have a punter that can pin the opposition within the 10, within the 5 consistently, the battle for field position is ours every single week. And I know he's putting up a fight. He has to put up a fight, frankly, because this kid is a prodigy. This kid is special. And this is somebody that I've been reading about for the last, 3-4 years. And the fact that he did have the career that he went on to have at San Diego State and, come to Buffalo and be drafted as that guy. I don't want to say I'm rooting for a player in a position battle. I understand that these guys have jobs, they got family to provide for and all that stuff. But I am rooting for the punt god to get it done because I think he could provide the Bills that last element that they need in order to be a complete team.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're looking at it, right, it's big arm quarterback, big leg field goal kicker, big leg punter, right? Like I think you just try to do those things, and if you can be successful at it, that's what you do. So one last thing before we get ready to wrap up. There's an injury today. We chatted about it a little bit offline. Stevenson went down, and they're saying weeks. So who's going to return footballs for this team? Are you in the Tavon Austin camp? Do you think Isaiah McKenzie's going to, fill that role as well to make him more of a lock for this team? Is he enough at wide receiver? Like, where do you think it ends up real quick before we get out of here?
Yeah, I that's a great question. That's an injury that definitely stinks. I want Marcus Stevenson to be, healthy, ready, willing, and able. I really like him, and but I feel like he got some Bills Mafia hate with some of the returns that he had, but I think he was thrown into that role, and it was kind of late in the season with the emergence of the before-mentioned Isaiah McKenzie, who I think Isaiah McKenzie has now played himself into a role where he is too crucial to the team, too crucial to the offense to play that position anymore. He's a true slot receiver. I mean, I watched Josh Allen feed him consistently over the course of training camp, both practices that I attended. And I also watched Isaiah McKenzie really take on just more of a leadership role as a wideout rather than as a returner. And there is a difference within that with some of the younger guys that he's talking to try to get them up to speed. Truthfully, the last time I was on your show, we talked about the addition of Von Austin. You broke that news to me. And at the time, I said to myself, is that really necessary? And as it turns out, it was super necessary to add a player like Tavon Austin, who is a jack of all trades, Army knife type player that can be a punt returner, a kick returner, as well as take reps at the wideout position if an injury presents itself or to keep somebody fresh. I think that's a great addition. It seems like Tavon Austin is looking at this as his ride of an opportunity, not only in the NFL, but with a team that is the betting favorite to win the Super Bowl this year, the golden opportunity for Tavon Austin to be a part of something special, and that opportunity has somewhat eluded him with some of his stops, and this is it. So I think that this is a great opportunity for him, and I think he's the guy at kick returner or punt return.
Yeah, I'm kind of feeling that myself. Unless something just crazy happens, I think he's going to end up being the guy in that role. And I agree with all of that. It's kind of win or go home for him, realistically, right? There's not many more offers out there. So, all right, well, that's going to do it for this week. Appreciate you coming on, Ryan. You got anything coming up you want to shout out?
Yeah, I got a lot of awesome stuff coming up. Profiling my top 10 fantasy football quarterbacks, wide receivers, running backs, of course, and tight ends as we're inching closer to fantasy football season. Of course, I'm looking forward to that. You can find my podcast, the Thomastake Sports Podcast, on YouTube, Facebook, and all audio podcasting platforms. And as you can see, follow me on Twitter at Ryan Thomastake. Colt, I really appreciate you having me on, buddy.
Absolutely, dude. I enjoy having you on all the time. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Make sure you guys, if you can, you head over to primetime585.org and check them out. Like I mentioned, we're going to be jamming through the roster, the rest of this August here as we get ready to get towards football season. You'll see down in the description, whether you're listening to this, watching this, or whatever, there's a link down there. We're going to be doing a little giveaway for some preseason tickets for the Colts Bills for next week for that first home game there. So all you got to do is click on the link, throw your name and email in there, and you'll be entered in to win, the tickets for next week's game. So appreciate everybody for showing up, hanging out with us tonight. It's going to be really exciting as we get closer and closer to this season, really kicking off for the Bills, and hopefully everybody stays healthy. We make it there, and we get to have a huge opener against the ex-world champs, as far as I can see it. So thanks for stopping by, everybody. Appreciate you all. Go Bills.
Make sure you leave a review and subscribe so you never miss another episode. We'll see